Hello, so we are going to be reviewing um, Chinua Achebe's A Man of the People. So it's one of those good novels that you might want to read. So it is a novel that chronicles political unrest in an African nation, right? That only recently gained its independence, that is from Britain, talking about Nigeria, its country itself. So the novel opens with a narrator called Odili Samalu awaiting the arrival of the minister Nanga, who was also known as Chief Nanga, at the grammar school in Anata where Odili teaches. The villagers are also excited, so to say, to see Nanga, but Odili is not, for he thinks that a man like Nanga and his political methods were considered unethical by Odili. However, uh, Odili's cynicism surrounding Nanga begins to fade after Nanga himself gives a speech. So the book basically in chapter one, or in chapter two, sorry, um, Odili explains why he chooses to be a teacher, believing the post offers him more autonomy than working as a civil servant, right? So he mentions to Nanga wanting to return to school, and Nanga invites Odili to stay with him in the capital, that is in Bori. So he thinks over it and might talk to the minister or overseas training about the scholarship that he wanted. So later on, Odili's friend Andrew visits him, and then they talk about girls as usual. Guys talk about, particularly Edna, a young girl who was going to be Mr. Nanga's second wife. So Odili travels to Bori in chapter 3 to stay with Nanga, who offers him a warm welcome and his own room in his house. So they go to visit Chief Koko, the Minister of Overseas Training, from whom Odili was supposed to get a scholarship. However, before they can begin to discuss Odili's scholarship, uh, Coco drinks some coffee and becomes convinced that he was poisoned. The reason being it was a different type of coffee because the cook had run out of some coffee, like the usual coffee they would drink. And then Adili speaks with Nanga's wife, who is referred to Mrs. Nanga. So he talks about her, uh, about Edna with her, and then deciding that if should become minister and whatnot. Then in chapter 4, Odili learns that Mrs. Nanga and the children will leave Bori and return to Anata. So Nanga's home village, so they were supposed to go. He was glad for this, as he thought that he would be indecorous to entertain women, particularly a friend whose name is Elsie, with whom he hopes to be intimate while Mrs. Nanga is in the house, right? Some strange things happening. So Nanga returns for lunch and has a phone meeting with the Minister of Public Construction. So Didi overhears the conversation and then notices that Mr. Nanga actually wanted to involve the Europeans in the project, unlike the local experts. So the chapter ends with a visit from a pair of Americans. Their names John and Jean. So John fleets with Nanga and speaks about Odili. John Jean fleets with Nanga while John speaks with Odili about American colonization. Moving on, in chapter 5, John and Jean invite Nanga and Odili for dinner. However, John ends up flying back to America while Nanga is being entertained. So Nanga arranges for Jean to drive Odili home after the dinner. So Odili enjoys dinner, particularly when he's able to correct a misconception about the meaning of a local gesture. That is, the other dinner guests leave while they leave, so he and Jean dance and boom, they're intimate. Then Jean offers to drive Odili home, and then they take an early morning tour through Odili. So during which Odili becomes frustrated with Jean and ultimately uh, asks to see her again. In chapter 6, brings Odili to the hospital where his friend and colleague Lava Elsie used to work. So he arranges for her to visit him at Nanga's for 2 days. So for her to come along to entertain Nanga. The day arrives and he'll pick her from the hospital, and Nanga decides he'll accompany Odili. So on his way to speak at an exhibit of the African authors, he asks Odili about his relationship to Elsie, of which Odili responded that there was nothing really going on between them. Then the three attended the event together, though Odili spends um Nanga's speech whispering with Elsie. In chapter 7, uh, picks up the exhibit. So Dilly Lenz and Nanga bribed the editor of the Daily Merchant with £5 in order to keep withholding information pertaining to Nanga's interests. So the editor promises to print Nanga's speech on the front page of the newspaper. Nanga, Odili, and Elsie at Nanga's home, where Odili hopes to entertain Elsie in private, right? Strange. Nanga ends up visiting her in her room, which angers Odili. So Odili leaves in the house and wanders in wonders. So he even leaves Bori for several hours. Upon his return, he and Nanga argue, and then there he goes. He leaves for good. Odili goes to stay with his friend Max Kuramo, that is in chapter 8. Max, as a lawyer in Borio, Dili decides that he's going to exact revenge on Nanga. That is by sleeping with Edna, the girl Mr. Nanga wanted to make the second wife, right? So forms up a political party himself because he wanted to stand for minister because Mr. Nanga had an affair with the girl he wanted actually, whom they met with at university. So in chapter 9, brings Odili to Anata. There is some commotion as Josiah, a local merchant, is chased out by the villagers. That was because he exchanged the walking stick of a blind man and stuff like that, which wasn't going in like that. So he offers to take Edna there to bring her mother some food on a bike. They were going to the hospital by then. And then Odili messed up. They fell off the bike, and then the food was uh, ruined like that. Then they had to buy some food from near the hospital, which Odili actually offered to buy. And then in chapter 10, Odili sees Edna again in at Mr. Nanga's house. So he tells her she shouldn't rush into marrying him. So he was kind of talking her out of that. So after being harassed, he hires a bodyguard. Odili is fired from his job as a teacher, unfortunately. So he goes to say goodbye to Mrs. Nanga, who treats him with hostility. He says a farewell to Edna as well, who seems sad to see him go. In chapter 11, Odili decides that he wants to be with Edna for his own reasons, unlike the reasons of me taking revenge and all that. He receives a letter in which she offers friendship. Odili is forced to put together a team of bodyguards led by a man named Boniface to protect him against the Nangavanga, the guys who, the thugs rather, who were supporting Mr. Nanga. Odili returns to his home village in Orua, where he stays with his father. Nanga comes to bribe him into dropping his campaign, but Odili refuses. So Max announces Odili's candidacy in chapter 12. So the political party thing actually went to work out. So she would have taken Nanga's money, that was Max telling him, that he himself took money from Chief Coco. Odili didn't even like the idea of using the money he considered dirty because of the argument that they had with Mr. Nanga and all that. So the next day he goes to tell Edna he is in love with her, But she yells at him and tells him to leave and never to come back to that house again. So Dilly's father is removed from office as well, and he's heavily taxed. That was because he allowed Max and Odili to stay at his home, right? And in chapter 13, the people were told to vote for Mr. Nanga. So Odili goes to the inaugural campaign meeting where he's identified and then he's beaten up, like badly beaten up, that he went to the hospital. So Nanga's thugs prevent Odili from forming candidacy, and he misses the election while he was in hospital. So he learns that Max was also killed, and then the unrest takes over as the thugs and murderers were acting violently throughout the country. So a government falls, and the country is taken over by the army, which arrests Nanga. Max is declared as hero. Odilia and Edna receive their father's blessings to marry, and that is how tragic a man of the people is. So till we meet in the next segment, a man of the people.